Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be covering Azure Blob Storage. I'm going to be showing you guys how to upload, download files or images, as well as deleting and also getting what you have in a certain container. And I'm going to walk you guys through the steps of how to actually create your blob storage container, in Azure. So let's start with, what is Azure Blob Storage? So what is it? It's basically Microsoft's cloud solution for object storage, as well as storing massive amounts of unorganized data. You can use it to serve and store images, documents, files, videos, or audios. Any of these big things that you wouldn't want to put in a traditional database, as well as you can, have data backups or do logging or things of that nature. But also Azure provides, security and gives you a ton of space to store things where you don't have to worry about it. So the next things I'm going to show you guys actually how to create these blob containers, and then we're actually going to interact with them with the .NET 6 API that I have. So let's move on to that. But really quick, I would really appreciate if you guys drop a like on this video so it can spread to more developers on YouTube, as well as subscribe so you guys don't miss out on any of the other lovely content on this channel. So I appreciate it, but now let's move on. Alright, so we are now in Azure. First things first, you're going to need a resource group. So just create a resource group, whatever's closest to you under whatever subscription you may have. Just create one. Doesn't really matter what it is. All you just need to do is you need to have one. Next thing is you need to create a storage account, and that's what we're going to do together. So once you're here at the storage accounts page, what you're going to want to do is you want to create one. Make sure that the resource group that you created is selected here, and then create a storage account name. It all has to be lowercase. And once you type the whole and once you put a storage account name, you can now just go ahead and review, and then go ahead and create once it finishes its validation. Create. And then it should be done. Once you create your storage account, you should be at a page that looks something like this. We are now going to create the container. The container, you click right here, go to your containers, and now we are going to create one. So the plus sign, container. So we're just going to call this blob container YT for YouTube, and you can just leave it as private for this example and create. Once you have your container actually created, I want to show you guys one thing first. If you click on your container, you can actually go in here and upload manually whatever you want to upload straight into here. So that is an option. We're going to be doing everything from the code, but if you needed to upload something manually into Azure, you could upload into your container using this. So just wanted to let you know that that is a thing you can do. But the next thing we're going to need is we're going to need the connection strings to our storage account. So going back there, then you scroll down here to access keys, and you're going to see the name of your storage account, and then you're going to have your connection string. So what you're going to want to do is you want to copy this one, and then it's going to go into the API as a connection string like you would have in any other database. So now that we have this, we are going to switch over to the API project and actually start, accessing what we just created. Okay guys, so we are now at the Blob Storage API project. So basically I just created a .NET 6 API. And I already went ahead and added a few things, and I'm going to walk you guys through what I already have in this project and what you guys are going to need. But first things first, since we just were in the Azure portal and we were talking about the connection strings, please go in and add in kind of this Azure Blob connection string, or just your connection string, and then paste in here that connection string you created for your storage account. That's the one that we need. Put it in here, and now I'm going to show you guys the rest of this application so we can go through and then actually, interact with the blob storage. I'm going to run the project very quick just to show you guys the 4 endpoints that we're going to have in our controller/repository. We're going to have a get blob file. This is going to get an individual image or text file. We are going to upload a blob file. So we're going to upload a text file and an image, and then we're going to delete, as well as get a list of everything that we have in our blob storage container. The other thing that I want to walk you guys through is that we have this controller. We will be using Postman as kind of our front end, but obviously you guys can think of it as you're going to have some website, some front end site that would be interacting with this API and pulling these images or files as needed. So all the files that we have here is we have this blob storage container, very self-explanatory, just, calling out to the repository here. This is the get blob. It's going to take this path and then, send it off. We have our post. This is going to be basically the uploading a blob file, which we're going to have this content model, which I will show you guys in a second. We get that from the body, and then we send off the file path and the file name to the repository. The delete is, again, just going to take a path. And then listing our blobs takes nothing because we're just going to list everything. It's just a get all, essentially. So here we're just going to have the interface, which basically, again, is just going to define the 4 endpoints that I already showed you guys. Then we have 2 models. We have this blob content model. This essentially is what I was showing you guys right here. Basically, it's just what we need to get from the front end or the client side to be able to successfully, upload a file. And basically, it's just we need the file path and the file name. File path to wherever you are uploading, this image or blob item from, and then the name to just make it a little bit easier. And the second object that we have is this blob object. This is basically what we are returning when we download. So basically, whenever we get this blob file, this is what we're returning right here, or returning right here, and then returning this as a file. So we have this blob object, which we are returning a stream of bytes or content, and then we need the content type. Why? Because whenever you serve this back to the client side, whatever it may be, it's needed to know the content type so that it can serve it correctly. If it's an image and a PNG, it needs to know that when it's going to the client side, or if it's a text file or something else. And I'll show you guys how I'm handling that in this API once I actually show you guys the code for the repository. And the next thing I want to show you guys is just that the blob repository, it's right now not implemented. We will be filling this out very soon. And then I already showed you guys the app settings. That's the only changing there. And then almost finally, you go into your program.cs and you need to add this singleton of a blob service client and then give it that connection string that we copied from Azure portal. And then you already added to the app settings. Then you're just going to put that in here. And there's one other thing, because we do need one library for actually accessing the Azure Blob storage. And I'm going to show you guys what library you actually need to install. To make sure that you actually have access to Azure Blob Storage, you need to install Azure Storage.blobs. This is very needed, and we're going to be using it in the repository when we're actually doing these things. So definitely install this, and once you have that, you're good to go. And now we can actually go implement the repository. We are now back at the Blob repository, and quickly, I just want to say that this whole project will be put on my GitHub. The link to that should be in the description. If you guys just want to go get the code, play with it, check it out, it will all be there for you guys. First things first, we need to add in some variables. So let's go ahead and add those. We have our blob service client and then our blob container client. Next thing, we need our constructor. So we have our blob repository constructor. We're feeding in the service client. And we're initializing it, as well as we are initializing the client by basically going and getting the container that we created. And right here, we just put the name of the one that we created, which is blob container YT in my instance. So that is the string that I put there, and we've now initialized it. So now the one I want to do first is the uploading one. We want to upload a blob file so that we have something there, so that then we can do all the other ones. So let's implement that one first. It's not that difficult, but we need to do some stuff. So like I said, we have the blob content model, which is what's going to be passed in. If you guys look at here, we are uploading a blob file, and in our container for that one, we have this from body, this blob container model. And then we basically just go get the file path, file name, and pass that into the repository. So to actually implement upload blob file, we first need to create a blob client. That blob client, we're going to pass in the file name of the file that we are trying to create. And then the next thing we're going to say is, boom, let's upload this. Upload async off of that. We're going to need to make this method async as well to make sure everything's asynchronous and good. And then we're going to pass in the file path to this upload async. Basically, wherever your file is coming from, wherever it's saved, wherever it's stored, there's always going to be a file path passed in. And that's how it's going to know where to grab it from. And then we are going to send it because since this client is pointing to this blob container, that's where it's going to be uploaded to. And then all we're going to return is this absolute URI. This URI is going to be a long URL. Basically with your Azure Blob storage is going to be in there. I'm going to show you guys, and I'll explain why I'm passing this back once I actually test this. So this is basically all the code that goes into uploading, a file to Blob storage. So now let's actually test it. So I have a test file here called little file. It's just a text file that says, I got a little file on my desktop. I'm going to upload it to Blob storage. That's all it says. And then I have the thumbnail for this video right here. So I'm going to be uploading both of these. So this is a text file, and this is going to be an image. So let's go ahead and upload those, and let's test it. So I'm now running the API. I'm going to drop this. I have a breakpoint at the repository. I have a breakpoint at the controller. And we now go to Postman, and you can see that I created my object, raw JSON, and I have the endpoint right here. So now let's test. Should go through. As we see, we are getting our URL to where it is on my desktop. and then the image is right here, or the file name, I mean. And now we step through. We're going to see that we create this blob client correctly. Everything's good. We have our storage account here, the actual container name. And then we step through. We're going to see that we're going to get a status. So status 201, it's created. So good. It should be up in Azure, and we're about to confirm in a second. And I want to explain that we are getting, as you see, this long URL of this basically points where in Azure Blob Storage what you just created is. And why do I say return this, and why not just return okay? Well, because let's say you are in an actual real world application, and let's say you have an entry for some new part that your shop just received. Well, you're going to take a few pictures of this, and you have information on the given part. Well, that information will be filed away in your regular relational database, but you can't store the images of the part in the database, right? This is why we're using blob storage. So this URL is what you actually want to store along with the entry of the part info as some type of list. Why? Because this points you to when you go and retrieve all the information and images for that given part in this example, that points you exactly where in blob storage it is. It tells you your storage account, it tells you the container, and it tells you the name, so that then you can go and retrieve it all when the client side needs to actually show everything off. So this is why I want you guys to store this, and then I'll show you guys how to break it all apart so that you can use all the pieces that you need when you do need to download this stuff back. But moving forward, I just wanted to explain that. You should be good, and I'm returning this URL like I said, and I'm going to be copying that because we might need that in a bit. And now just to prove that it was created, let's go back to our container. Let us refresh. And now that we refreshed, we have our thumbnail.png. It is right here. It is created. It is in blob storage. Awesome. Now let's do that again for the text file to prove to you guys that it doesn't matter what type of file you're doing. Blob storage doesn't care. It's going to save it. So now let's go ahead and do the text file. So again, I've now changed this to be the little file.txt, which is this file right here. I'm going to send it. You see that we get everything the same thing, but now it's the little file.txt. Go through. And we should now we get the URL for this file as well. So I'm going to save that as well because we're going to need that for the next examples. But again, let's now go back to Azure Portal. Now that I refresh, you can see that the TXT, the text file, and the image are sitting right next to each other. We don't have to change any code, and they are just perfectly sitting in Azure Blob Storage. But now how about we write the code to list them out? I want to see what we have in this container. Because I don't know, because I'm ignorant, because I don't remember what I just did 5 seconds ago. So let's actually write the code to get everything that this container has in it, and let's list it out to the client side. So let's go write that code in the repository. Okay, so now that we're back at the API, the next thing that we're going to want to do is do this list blobs, because I want to be able to show to the client side what we have. So first, I'm going to grab this string list, and I'm going to create it here. And then we're basically just going to do something very simple. You guys might be surprised with how easy and painless it is. So we take that same client blob container client object that we created up here that already points to the container, and then we're just going to do get blobs async, and then we're just going to loop through all the blob items, add them to this list, and then we return this list. As you can see, we need to add this async as well, and then we're going to go back to the controller, and in the controller, what are we doing? Nothing. We don't receive anything. We just get this list blobs. We call the repository, and then we return OK with the result. And this is all the code we need to access everything that's in this given container, add it to a list, and then show it to the client side. So let's run it, and let's test it. Now with our API running again, I have the URL right here in Postman. We are going to send. I have a breakpoint in here. So as we can see, we're in the repository. We have the client again, storage account, blob container YT. We are going to get our first one. So what is this blob item? This blob item is our little file.txt, and it has a bunch of properties and blah, blah, blah. We're just going to add the name to our string list and move along. And then we should see our next item is going to be the thumbnail.png. And now I'm just going to fast forward, and we get the list of, what we have in our container. So if we ever had a question of what we have, that's how you just list them out. But now that we have this, let's actually show you guys how to download that text file back or download that image, because that's where it gets a little tricky, because we do have to pay attention to the content type. So the client side, or Postman in our case, knows how to show off what it's receiving. and that's very tricky, but I'm going to show you guys my solution to that. So let's dive into the repository again. Okay, so I'm back at the controller, and now how to actually download or get all the blob files that we already uploaded to Azure Blob Storage. So first things first, we have our endpoint right here. We're going to be receiving the URL, that URL that I told you guys to save and the reasons why. We're going to then be receiving it here and then actually splitting it up and using the different parts of it in the repository. So now that's all this is, and we're going to be returning a file with its content type, which this is very important, and then a byte stream or whatever content it may be. So now in the repository, let's start coding. We need to get our URL. We need to then extract the file name. So we're new URI, get the segment, and then get the very last one because we want our file name. If you look at Postman, our last section is the file name, and then also the extension are two very important things that we are going to need. And when I mention extensions, we are going to need to be able to decipher what is an image and what is not, because it makes a big difference when it comes to actually serving the correct content type. So I'm quickly just going to make a small list here called image extensions, and this is what we're going to use to detect, is the content that we're downloading an image or is it something else? And obviously, as this goes along, you guys could add or play around with whatever image extensions or whatever videos, whatever you guys want to detect, you could add into here, and then you'll see how we actually use it in a second. So I went ahead and just added a try catch. And now that we added the try catch, we're going to do something that we've done on some of the other ones, which is basically just create a blob client using the file name that we extracted here. And then I'm going to do an if statement. Next, using that given blob client, I'm going to check, hey, does this file that we actually created the blob client from, does it actually exist? If so, we can continue actually trying to download it. If not, return null, or you would have some other type of error case where you would return something letting know like, hey, this is not actually correct. But moving on, in the case that it does exist, which in our case it's going to, we are going to need a blob download result object called content. And we're going to basically say on the blob client, download content async. So this is basically where we're actually going to get the content from Azure Blob Storage. And now we have to manipulate it, parse through it, and make sure that we extract from it what we actually need. The next thing I actually want to do so that we can actually pass this data, all the content, correctly to the client side, is that we need to actually turn it into a stream of bytes. So that's going to be the downloaded data here. So basically the content of the download result, the content actual object of it, to stream. And now the next thing is probably the most important part to actually getting these files. And this is the way I do it. There's probably other variations, but this is the one I'm using, and I am using the string list that's up here. So as you see, I added another if else. In this if else, what am I checking? Well, I'm going into the image extensions, which is this list of strings, and I'm checking, does the path extension of this file name, so like littlefile.txt or thumbnail.png, do either of those path extensions exist in this list? Because if it does exist, that means that I'm returning an image and I want my content type to be set as image. Else, I do not care about the content type and we can just use the default one. And this is very critical so that your client side can actually correctly show the image or show whatever type of content that you're passing correctly. So the next thing, if it actually is the extension that's in here, which in one of our cases it will be, we are going to take that extension from the file name, and then we are going to return a new blob model. And that blob model was which model? It was the blob object model, which contained just what? The content, which was a stream, if you guys remember, a stream, and then a string, which was the content type. So right here, we're just going to pass back the stream of bytes. That doesn't change. But then our content type here, we're basically going to remove that period, and we're going to build image basically \PNG in our thumbnails case. And then in the case of our text file, we're going to have something slightly different. We are going to just have the regular content type that comes with it. And that's how I'm basically checking, are we getting an image or whatever else we could possibly check for, or are we just returning the default? So now let's go ahead and actually try and retrieve both of the items from Azure Blob Storage and see if Postman knows what to correctly do with them. I have my API running again, so now let's actually go and get that thumbnail.png that we uploaded to Azure Blob Storage. So I have my endpoint right here. I wrote the whole thing already, blob storage \get blob file, and I have my URL query parameter, and then I'm going to copy and paste in that path that I told you guys is what we would, in theory, in a real application store. And we're going to have that there, append that to here, and we're going to send. And now I have a few breakpoints. So we see that the URL we're getting correctly in here, and we've hit this. So now let's move through. Now we are in the repository. Let me zoom out a little bit. First things first, this is going to get the file name. So we've already extracted from this URL the storage account, blah, 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 blob container YT, thumbnail. We already got the file name. We're going to get into the first part, create our blob client. Now we're going to check, does it exist? And unless something's changed from this, it hasn't, it's there. So we should step through. We now get our content, and I'm going to turn our content to streams. So we just see that we have a memory stream here of a certain length. So there's actually content there. And now we're going to check, does thumbnail.png exist here? Well, I hope it does. So we should step through and it should hit into the first if. Now we're going to get that extension of .png, but now I need the content type to be image /png so that it knows on the client side that we are returning an image, and then we're just passing along our downloaded data. So I'm going to show you guys the object when we step through. Now our content here is result of blob object, and we have our memory stream, and then we have content type of image /png, and then we're just returning a file of that, and we step through. And Postman is able to successfully show the image of the thumbnail because we did the correct content type, which is why it is so key. But now let's go and get littlefile.txt. So without doing anything different, I'm just going to go in here and change this path. And now we send again. We should see that now we're getting littlefile.txt. We're going to step all the way through. None of this is going to change. It should exist. But now when we get to this if statement, it's not going to have .txt in here. So what we're going to do is we're just going to return the content type of octet stream, which is like the default, and then our content, which is there as well. And it is obviously a different length from the image because it's a much smaller text file. And now we step through. And as we can see, it's printing out the text from the text file. And if you don't believe me, we can just show them both side by side right here. Same text. So it was able to grab it and display it successfully. But now let's go and do the final one, which is just let's delete one of these items. So I'm sick and tired of thumbnail.png and littlefile.txt. I want to delete them from my Azure Blob storage. So it's a very simple amount of code to actually remove it from Blob storage. So let's actually move on to that. When it comes to our controller, there's not much to it. It's just HTTP delete. And we're just getting that same path. That same long path, and we're just going to do and call delete blob and then just return OK. So in our repository, what are we actually going to do? So in our delete blob, first I'm just going to make this async really quick. And then the first thing that we need to do is out of that path, we're going to do exactly the same thing that we did right here. And that's basically we just want to extract the file name so that we can just specifically tell Azure Blob Storage, create this blob client, and then if it exists, delete it. So we create that blob client, and then the next thing is the simple thing of just saying, hey, blob client, just delete it if it exists. We already gave you the file name. So look through, check, is it there? If so, get it out of here. And that's all the code that you need to actually delete something from this given container in blob storage. So now let's actually get rid of one of them. So I have my API running again, and now we're at our delete. So again, we have the same URL, delete blob, and then we again also have a similar path and then the long path. So we are going to use littlefile.txt because I'm just so sick and tired of it. So now let's actually send. I have a breakpoint there, and let me add a breakpoint here just to make sure that everything's good. Now let's send. So as we can see, we're hitting it. We're getting the path correctly to littlefile. We're going to step through, grab the file name, create the blob client, and then if it exists, which it should, delete it. And then we should see nothing except 200 OK. That means it worked. And now let's actually go and prove it over here by refreshing. And now that I refresh, you can see that littlefile.txt is gone from Azure Blob Storage. But that's it, guys. This is all the code that you actually need to, download an image or a file, upload an image or a file, delete anything from blob storage, as well as just listing out everything that you may have in your container, as well as I showed you guys how to actually create everything that you need, your storage account and your containers. And you now have this wonderful .NET 6 API with these controllers and these repositories. And you may be thinking now, well, how do I actually unit test this stuff? Well, I got you guys, so watch this video for all the information on unit testing at .NET 6 API.